So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are following us from. It could be morning or afternoon, from depending on the part of the country that you are following us live on this conversation. This discussion just raises issues around Zambia's debt, especially in particular. This evening, we'll be discussing the role of civil society organizations and the media in as far as debt management is concerned. Obviously, we are aware that you have heard quite a lot of things about the country's debt, but I think it's also very important that we understand the true picture around Zambia's debt. And this conversation, may I highlight from the onset, that is brought to you by the Civil Society for Debt Alliance and the Alliance for Community Action, ACA. Like I said, that we know that you've heard quite a lot of information around the country's debt, but just to put you up to speed, as of 2013, for example, the public debt for the country stood at 6.29 billion US dollars. In 2015, it moved to 11.78 United States billion United States dollars. Then in 2017, it moved to 22.29 US billion US dollars, rather. And then in 2019, it moved to 27.25 United States billion United States dollars. And in 2021, it moved to 24.05 billion US dollars. Now, as at 2022, the public debt for the country stood at, and may I be particular, June, that is end of June 2022, the public debt stood at US dollar 31.5 billion. Okay, so this evening we'll be discussing the role of civil society organizations as well as the media in as far as debt management is concerned. My discussants this evening, I have Peter Mumba from the Civil Society for Debt Alliance. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us, and good evening.
Hi, good evening. How are you doing? And thank you so much for having me.
Not so bad. Livingston is hot, not knowing Lusaka.
Yeah, no, actually, Lusaka is also quite hot, I must say. Yeah, but I think we are enjoying the weather whilst it still lasts. Yeah,
I know, right?
yeah.
Thank you so much for coming through on the program, sir.
Okay, no, you are welcome, and thank you so much again for having me. Good evening
Good
to our
evening.
listeners and those that will be viewing. Good evening to you as well.
Sure. We'll also be joined shortly by governance activist Michael Zulu, as well as media expert Brian Hatyoka Makwati. The two will be joining us shortly. We hope that they could join us for this conversation to be fruitful. Mr. Mumba, having highlighted in my introduction the current status of Zambia's public debt, um, from the onset, do we have a capacity as a country to pay back the debt? If yes, how?
Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for the wonderful question as well as the opportunity to respond to such issues that are quite important to the Zambians and also to the country at large. So I think in terms of looking at whether Zambia does have the capacity to pay back debt, well, I would say initially, or let me say ideally, without any form of external pressure and any form of economic mismanagement, I think Zambia should actually or would have actually been in a position to actually pay back the kind of debt that we actually owe. But unfortunately, I think we had experienced as a country some episodes of economic mismanagement. We also did experience some episodes in terms of pressure from outside the country, the likes of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also did experience pressures actually from the likes of the Russia Ukraine geopolitical tensions. I think those just simply worsened the already a bad situation for the country in terms of its debt. So as it stands now, I think we are not really in a capacity to repay our debt without having other sectors of the economy suffer. So it's one thing that may require us to sacrifice various sectors of our economy in order for us to see our debt being repaid. But of course, interesting questions that will obviously arise will be that at what expense or at what cost, and who's going to suffer if we decide to actually just go ahead and start to pay the debts that we owe in terms of debt servicing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mumba. Just a follow up. How do you think we got here as a country to uh, accumulatively have 31.5 billion US dollars public debt as at end of June 2022?
Well, I think getting here as a country is it dates from way back, because if you look at our history as a country, we are a country that is known for not learning from our previous mistakes, or rather from our our borrowing behavior, our bad borrowing behavior. If you recall, from the famous IMF reform programs that obviously happened in the late 1980s, you will see that when the IMF did come through, they did offer some stringent conditionalities and policies that saw us obviously have more like a breathing space in terms of our debt. So part of our debt was forgiven. Part of our debt servicing arrangements were actually lifted, and I think we put the country back on track. But soon after, somewhere in the mid 1990s, 1997 towards the late 1990s, we see that we actually did jump again back on this borrowing spree, and this saw us through to the HIPIC arrangement. Again, coming from HIPIC, we did see that we again had very high debt, actually unsustainable debt. So from HIPIC again, we saw how that the HIPIC arrangement did actually give us some kind of relief. So I think from the HIPIC, we should have actually started learning lessons and taking down some notes on how well to manage an economy in terms of debt accumulation. But unfortunately, I think that didn't happen. We see that soon after HIPIC, towards 2008, after the global financial crunch there, and then we see that we started actually accumulating some debt. Some countries did come through and offer some kind of debt relief, but I think the whole thing obviously had to change the time we actually got an upgrade in terms of our economic classification as a country. So of course that was around 2011, and coincidentally at the same time, after being exposed, or rather being upgraded in terms of economic classification as a country, we did see how that we had a shift in terms of our priorities as a country, in terms of our economic reform and also our economic prospects. We did see that we wanted to embark more on infrastructure development. We see that we wanted to embark more on putting money in people's pockets. So I think that kind of agenda, in as much as was good, coincided with something that was not very favorable for a country such as Zambia, because that economic uplift in terms of classification, we were actually exposed now to more expensive debt, more expensive credit, I must say. So this more expensive credit, the likes of the Eurobonds, is debt that is not too favorable for certain countries that are obviously in their developing phase, like Zambia. So I think this kind of exposure of also didn't really sit well with the current situation, with the then situation of the country. So we find ourselves issuing 3 Eurobonds. We found ourselves also being exposed to credit from the East, from China, and the Chinese debt portfolio is actually mixed. We have commercial debt being also being present in the portfolio itself. There's private debt, and there's also debt from the Chinese government itself. So such kind of debt obviously did put us in a very, very tricky position, because obviously we couldn't manage it well in terms of how it was coming to the country. It came in terms of project finance. It came in terms of all this infrastructure development finance. So I think that was how we actually found ourselves here. And obviously Zambia, like it is known, became the first country to default just after the COVID-19 pandemic. So you see that it has actually been a long journey where we were supposed to be learning lessons up until today.
Thank you, Mr. Mumba. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been joined by media expert Brian Hatyoka Makwati. Mr. Hatyoka, you're not so late to dinner. Thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I hope my voice is clear.
Very clear, sir. Audible.
Oh, thanks a lot. Sorry for joining you late. I had technological challenges.
No, we understand. I hope by now you are agreeing with me that age is slowly catching up, sir.
Yes, sure.
Straight into the conversation. Although we also have other guests, we have Peter Mumba from the Civil Society for Debt Alliance. We should also be joined by governance activist Michael Zulu shortly. I understand he's going through technological connectivities as well, but we hope that they can be resolved in the quickest possible time. Ms. Hatyoka, the question for you as media, representing media, uh, how do you think our local media has reported about the country's debt situation so far?
Okay, thank you very much. I will give two sides of the coin. The first side of the coin is that the media has been very instrumental in reporting on issues of debt, both domestic and external debt. Most media houses have been reporting actually. If you check on their business news pages, like business news columns for TV, they have business news segments where they've been talking about debt issues. But I think that is just one side of the coin. The bigger side of the coin is that most of the reporting in the media has been through statements that have been issued by experts.
Please go on, Mr. Toka. We go on. I don't know if it's me, but I can't hear Mr. Hatyoka anymore. I hope he's still with us. Let's get back to you, Mr. Mumba. Uh, how what are some of the impacts that you have noted that the country's debt situation has put the country into so far?
Well, thank you so much again, Gabriel. I think in terms of the impact, that such a situation has actually put the country into, I think that the, the biggest thing has been, Zambia's reputation. I mean, if you check global news today, regional news today, you see that Zambia currently has been making headlines in terms of, its debt situation, its debt position. And previously also, Zambia did make headlines of being the first African country to default on its debt payments, post the COVID-19 era. So I think, those are not really, good implications, especially when you begin to talk about, the international community that actually looks at Zambia as an investment destination. So I think, first of all, the very fact that Zambia has been labeled as a data country, obviously, has various implications in terms of the confidence that it actually communicates to our investors. And obviously, if you've been following, the forex markets, you see that the Zambian kwacha has actually lost value. The Zambian kwacha has depreciated to against major world currencies. Of course, the most significant has been the United States dollar because of its current influence on the Zambian economy. So you see that most of that depreciation has been driven by weak investor sentiments coming from outside. So you see that investors are now hesitant to invest in Zambian financial securities or Zambian financial instruments. So this has had various effects because now, for an importing country like Zambia, you are going to realize that the more the kwacha depreciates, it feeds directly into the cost of living, ultimately feeding into inflation. And I think we all know the evils of inflation. We all know the evils of high cost of living. I'll give you an example. Now we are importing fuel. We are still an importing country when it comes to fuel. So when you talk about a high dollar price, which is obviously speaking to the kwacha, you see that even simple things like fuel become expensive. You see the things such as transport going up. You see the price of commodities beginning to go up, ultimately speaking to the cost of living. And once the cost of living is tempered with, you see that an ordinary Zambian, will obviously begin to be uncomfortable. It will be hard for an ordinary Zambian to live a normal life. Very difficult for an ordinary Zambian. Actually, if you look at cost of living, obviously as proxied by the BNNB by JCTR, you see that it was, I think, around 9,000. And if you look at that, that's already too high considering the minimum wage that currently Zambia has set. So already you see that some of the unpleasant effects of this debt situation are obviously putting Zambia in a very, very bad state. So I think I'll end here, and I'll obviously leave it up for more interaction.
All right. Thank you so much. Finally, we have Michael Zulu joining us. Thank you so much, sir. You are not so late as well. Mr. Brian Hatyoka just joined us 5 minutes before you came on. Thank you so much, however, for coming through. Good evening.
Thank you so
Are you
much.
getting me?
I'm getting
Yes,
you, yes.
Mr. Hatyoka, you're audible. Equally, Michael as well.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. Now, thanks for having me. My apologies once again for coming through a little bit late.
Right. No, I was just on a lighter note. I was struggling how to address you on this platform. Michael, Zulu, Saint Michael, which one?
No, it doesn't matter. Whichever. I have multi names, so whichever is comfortable with your era. Some people still have stuck to the Saint Michael, so
Yeah,
whichever you
that's
find comfortable.
all right.
But
Okay.
the most
So for
uncomfortable one is the Mister.
Mister, thank you so much. I'll call you Mr. Zulu.
No, that it's not comfortable.
Mr.
It's too
Michael.
big. No, it's too big.
All right, let's straight into it. I'd asked Mr. Mumba from the Civil Society for Dead Alliance to highlight to us how he thinks the country got here. I mean, to having accumulatively 31.5 billion US dollars as public debt, the country so far. What is your comment as well, if you have any, with regards to how we reached this far?
Well, there is no secret, comrade, to how we reached this far in terms of our debt as a country. It's because of the choices that we as citizens have made, right from independence up to the current government that we are in. So we have been choosing leaders that have been mismanaging the country's debt, the country's resources, so to say. So it's not a secret that it's the people that have accumulated this debt, that have signed this for this debt on behalf of the citizens. They are the same people that have failed to utilize this debt prudently, and so we found ourselves to being, perhaps the first country to have defaulted, in terms of debt, and our standing as Zambia in terms of debt right now, is not, encouraging. So that is what I would say briefly. It's
All right, thank you so
the
much.
politicians that have brought us here. It's our leaders that have brought us where we are.
All right, thank you so much. I'll get back to you. May I also indicate to our viewers and or listeners that you're free to participate in our comment section. You're free to drop your comment. You're free to ask a question or contribution. We shall value anything that you post to us through this platform. The conversation is brought to you by Civil Society for Debt Alliance and the Alliance for Community Action. And we're discussing basically Zambia's debt situation. In particular, we are looking at the role of civil society organizations and the media in debt management. Mr. Hatyoka, getting back to you, I had asked you how our local media, the Zambian media, has been reporting around the country's debt situation. I asked that question because when you go on the internet, for example, either articles or research papers, most of them have been published or written by international media. Does that then mean that our local media isn't interested in this very important topic of discussion, which is debt situation? seems Mr. Hatyoka is having a bit of some technological issues. Gentlemen, any of you could also pick this question. I mean, you interact with the media almost on a daily basis. Do you think our local media, sorry, is much interested to report accurately around the debt situation? Mr. Michael, would you love to pick that one?
Well, I think our media, just like the citizens, they fall in the bracket of the citizens. I think uh, on a larger part, citizens do not understand, the issues of debt, how it's accumulated, the contracts that are behind this debt, uh, and even this most famous IMF debt, or rather package. There are obviously certain clauses, that are not, the public is not privy to, so the media unfortunately falls in the same bracket as you and I. So it's a challenge to the media fraternity, to, take an interest, because we depend on them being the fourth estate. The citizens depend on the media for information, and that is why, bills like the access to information, those laws, they need to be realized.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mumba. Is there anything that civil society organizations have done previously and are doing at the moment in as far as the, uh, the country's debt situation is concerned, especially organization because it's strictly aligned to date?
Yeah, so I think the CSO space in Zambia has been quite active in the debt conversation. Obviously, just like Comrade Michael said, the average Zambian, the most basic Zambian in the deepest parts of this country, obviously has very little understanding in terms of what the program entails in itself. They also have very little understanding in terms of what the program means, or maybe even what the debt itself means to them. So I think CSOs have played quite a significant role, and I'll speak for the CSO Debt Alliance Secretariat, where I come from. I think we've done so much in terms of trying to simplify or unpack the IMF program. We've also done, even before the IMF program, we have tried to unpack Zambia's debt position, what it means. So we've done this through various Twitter spaces. We've gone live on Twitter. We have shared articles on Facebook and various media platforms. We have also gone on radio, and we have just tried to make it easy for the average Zambian to understand what this debt situation means for them as an individual, first of all, before it actually even goes to the country itself. Then we were also quite instrumental in the in the formulation of the Public Debt Management Act. I know, obviously, you could be aware that we are coming from a time where we had the loans, is it the loans, loans guarantee, the LGAA. Yeah, so that piece of legislation obviously had its own defects, and obviously if you look at part of the recommendations from the IMF program itself, where that we should revise our legislation around debt management. So I think the CSO Debt Alliance Secretariat, together with other instrumental civil society organizations, I think we did come in handy. We obviously inputted into this piece of legislation. We obviously advocated for its timely passing as well. And I think we are happy that it has come up, although we are still aware that there are a few gray areas as well in the piece of legislation, but of course far much better than the previous piece of legislation. And then currently we have continued to obviously provide more information in a simplified manner in terms of where we are as a country, dealing with debt. Like, for example, what has just happened today, where we saw there's the Ministry of Finance in Zambia and the IMF team come up with a staff level agreement, and obviously pending executive approval before we get the next disbursement. I think this is another issue that now we are working towards in terms of simplifying it, in terms of what it means to the Zambian people, and what are some of the the issues that will come with this kind of movement. So I think we've been quite instrumental, but I know there's still quite a lot that we can do and should do. So I think we remain open to more engagements, and also remain open to other points of advocacy. I know there are other issues that have been raised in terms of doing a campaign for debt cancellation. So I think that's another area that we can explore, of course, with various input, with a lot of input from people like you, and as well people like Comrade Michael here, and obviously Comrade Brian as well. So I think we are very open for engagement to make sure that this situation is made better for each and every Zambian.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mumba. Mr. Michael, good to have you. I just asked a question that for you, maybe the question is that have you been relevant as governance activists in terms of holding government accountable for decisions around debt? How have you been doing such activities?
Maybe
Comrade
I
Michael,
can come through since he's.
Yeah, sure. You can come through, Mr. Hatyoka. I don't know if Comrade Michael, you got the question.
Not exactly, comrade. Maybe you can repeat it.
Okay, so the question is, what role have you played as activists in ensuring that government is held accountable for any decision that was made or is yet to be made around the debt?
Well, for some of us as artists, activists, our stronghold is where the young people are now, and it's the social media. So what we've done is that we've as opposed to using our social platforms purely for artistic works, we've used these platforms to constantly remind our leaders, to constantly share information on debt, and as long as it's credible information, obviously we try to get as credible information as possible. So that is our humble role that we play, and in our own communities and our own spaces, we speak to the people, because it's very important, first of all, that the masses begin to understand and appreciate that debt is about them. So whatever decisions our leaders make, they make them in the name of the people, because first of all, we vote people into office so that they deliver certain services, either in social services, health services, issues like that. So equally with debt, so that is why it's important that we constantly go back to the communities, to the very least of our people, the person who doesn't even have a Facebook account, and make them understand that, government goes out there to borrow money on your behalf, in your name. And, when you, for example, when you can use uh, uh, for like voting, for example, the voting period can be used by citizens. It's a very strong opportunity. It's a very great opportunity for people to make decisions in terms of who they put in office, because ultimately it's the person you put in office. It's your president, it's your members of parliament, it's your councillors. These are the people, ultimately that will manage, the president will ultimately appoint the technocrats that will manage the debt, but ultimately it all starts, with the choosing the right leaders, so debt has to be like, the way people discuss condoms, for example, it has to be, it has to sink down to the roots, down to the ordinary person. Otherwise, it's a thing where it has hijacked citizens, so to say, because our citizens, we need to understand that some of us are not very literate, and when issues of debt are discussed, usually it's at a technocrat level. You need degrees, to understand these things. So it's important, again, that the government invests in information, where debt is concerned, in disseminating information to the public, just like the CSOs are trying to do. We commend the CSOs that are trying to educate people on the issue of debt, because ultimately, we need to make the people understand that the medicine that is not there in the hospital, the Nkongole that the government has taken, has gotten, it has a lot to do with that, so we need to make people accountable. So that is what I would say. Our role, has been that of being on the guillotine, in speaking on behalf of the masses.
Thank you so much, Comrade Michael. Mr. Hatyoka, I'll come back to you. Let me just ask this question very quickly to Mr. Mumba. The question is, we know that China is the big stakeholder here when it comes to the debt for the country. And the question is, what are some of the strategies do you think Zambia can employ in ensuring that the accrued debt is paid back? For example, in an event where China refuses to restructure, because we know that our government has asked for debt restructure. And what are your recommendations, Mr. Mumba?
Okay, so I think that, the starting point here should actually be that you see, I think one of the steps that our government had taken in terms of trying to restructure our debt was obviously to request for debt treatment under the G20 Common Framework. And I think one of the principles of the G20 Common Framework is actually that there is comparability of treatment of all creditors. So this actually means that all creditors are treated the same. But at the end of the day, Zambia, of course, finds herself in a very unique situation, because currently you see that our creditor portfolio, like I mentioned before, is quite diverse. And if you look at our largest single creditor being China, it obviously dictates that they have they have quite some influence on the entire process, or rather the success of the entire process in itself. So I think in terms of strategies, I think I would say the route that government has taken, to pursue the G20 Common Framework and and everything, I think it's a bit restrictive in pursuing various options for debt restructuring, because obviously it embarks on ensuring that all creditors are treated equally. So there has been a cry actually from China. If you remember a statement that was issued by the Chinese authorities, you see that they have actually highlighted that the West should actually respond in a similar manner. Talking about the Bretton Woods institutions, the likes of the IMF and the World Bank, they should equally come on board and restructure Zambia's debt as well. So this actually just shows that the requirements of our various creditors have actually put us in a very, very tight position, and obviously leaving us with very little room to actually navigate other options. So I think at present, the only thing that Zambia can do right now, and okay, let me not say the only, but let me say one of the things that Zambia can do as at now, is to obviously maintain sound bilateral relations with all her creditors. Obviously, this includes China. This includes creditors from the West, private creditors, Eurobond creditors, and all our creditors. Basically, we need to develop and maintain good bilateral relations, because this will be instrumental in terms of them feeling, they are quite important stakeholders in this whole conversation. Because you see, exploring options outside the common framework for now might mean that we are breaching some of the requirements of the framework, some of the principles of the framework, and it might also not sit well with creditors that have already agreed to participate in the framework. I always like giving this example. Imagine you're owing 3 of your neighbors, and you have agreed to say, okay, for all my neighbors, I will begin to pay them maybe quarterly payments, or maybe I'll begin to pay them maybe half or whichever amount every month on a monthly basis for the next 6 months. And then you turn to your neighbor on the left and say, okay, for you, I think maybe we can have a side negotiation and say, I'll pay you in 2 months whilst I pay others in 6 months. That's just an example, but obviously it shows that there could be some kind of unfair treatment. So saying this, I think the direction that we have taken as a country is a bit restrictive, and of course does not necessarily allow us to explore other options. But I mean, other options are still there. I think the biggest option is to grow our economy, to a level where, of course, we should be able to generate more revenue, first of all, and also, we should be able to boost our reserves. We should be able to, to have enough as a country such that we can begin, to service, our debt unconditionally. Not a situation where we see once we start servicing our debt, then we are saying the health sector should suffer, or once we start servicing our debt, we are saying that the education sector should suffer. I think that is not really an ideal situation. So I think the ideal scenario is that we grow our economy to a level where we can service our debt without having any critical sector of the economy suffer. Otherwise, I'll end by saying that the path that we have taken is a bit restrictive and doesn't allow us to explore other relations. I know there have been discussions about maybe having to see whether the president or any Zambian high official can obviously connect with China. In this case, them being the biggest creditors. I think that is possible, but of course, it might also start to, depending on what discussions we're having, it might also start to breach some of the principles of the G20 common framework, or rather the common framework for debt restructuring. Yeah. Otherwise, I think I'll end there.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Just to also make something to mention that earlier we got news in the day that Zambia and IMF have reached a staff level agreement on first review of the extended credit facility program. Just to quickly recapture the memories of our listeners and viewers, in 2022, our country signed a 1.3 billion US dollar extended credit facility supported program with International Monetary Fund. And very quickly, the objectives were that number one, restoring sustainability through fiscal adjustment and debt restructuring. Number two, creating room in the budget for much needed social spending. And the last one, strengthening governance and reducing the risk of corruption, including by improving public financial management. Mr. Mumba, any comments so far on this staff level uh, you know, agreement between our country and IMF?
Well, I think the staff level agreement in itself is just something that shows us that so far we have actually done what needed to be done in terms of the recommendations that were given by the IMF. But I think we should actually go beyond. Like I said, we should go beyond the staff level agreement and try to see how we can obviously grow our economy, because I see already questions. I mean, even if you look at the staff level agreement today, you see that some questions in terms or concerns around how that this Zambia's debt restructuring process has actually delayed have been raised, and it was noted that if this continues, it might begin to reverse even the little gains that we have made as a country. So I think in terms of the staff level agreement, it is a good gesture. It is something that is very applaudable in terms of the government, in terms of what they've done. Not to say that they've done very, very well, but I mean, it's quite applaudable, and obviously we are giving them room for improvement in areas where they need to improve. And ultimately, we need to see how that government can come on board and grow our economy. We also need to see how every Zambian can actually come on board and begin to contribute to the concept of economic growth and ultimately economic development, because this is the only way, this is the only possible way that we can actually begin to restructure our borrowing and our debt, and also can also begin to reform the way we borrow. Because obviously, if we have enough resources in this country, if we utilize those resources, I don't see a reason why we should be going out to borrow as often as we do, or to be going out to borrow as much as we do. So I think the ultimate thing should be to grow our economy. Otherwise, not stealing anything from the staff level agreement, I think it's an applaudable achievement for the country. And I think more effort has to be made in terms of calling upon the creditors to actually come on board and offer some kind of debt relief. I think this will be very key in the short run as we look forward to more long-term objectives. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Hatyoka, Comrade Michael here has brought a very important point also regarding investing in information. The media is the fourth estate when it comes to the general governance of any country. Is there a way how the media can help in terms of distributing this key information around the debt situation of the country to ensure that it reaches the very last individual or citizen in that particular ward who does not understand the content so far? Is there a way that the media can help us simplify these terminologies, these jargons around debt? Mr. Hatyoka seems to be going through another technological challenge, but we hope that
Is
he
it,
could.
I hope you can get me now.
Yes, please go
Are
on.
you able to get?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So the media, to start with, the media is very key in shaping the public agenda. The media actually sets the agenda. If the media wants to set debt as an agenda that Zambians should consume, it is very possible that they will even move the public away from politicking into these serious issues of debt. It's very possible because they have that agenda setting role in the economy to shape people's thinking, to change, to influence change. Now, the issue of debt, as the others have discussed, is a technical issue, and you find that it is just mainly being talked by experts, economists, Minister of Finance, the Bank of Zambia, and Comrade Mumba here, the experts who know this subject. But now, if you take a survey, just a simple survey among journalists, you find that a number of them don't understand. Now, if journalists who are supposed to shape public agenda don't understand, then that is a big problem for me as an expert in media, because a journalist who does not understand cannot inform the public well. So there are basic issues that we need to do as a nation. One, we have to build capacity in journalists in the area of business reporting, more importantly, in the area of debt. You know, debt has got two sides. There is a domestic debt and there is a foreign debt. Now, let me talk about domestic debt. Domestic debt, people who are odd, the Zambians who are odd, even if the media doesn't make any noise, you see them complaining, protesting. You saw those people who used to go to the Ministry of Justice. You saw the retirees. Because of their consistency in raising the issues on the fact that they were not paid, the media caught that story and they sensitized the public to an extent where these retirees, most of them have been paid. So we are saying the public, the civil society, the economists, the Ministry of Finance, we need to work together, give the journalists the information as we are trying to simplify the issues of the debt to a language that everybody will understand, just like we did on that issue of retirees. We made it as an agenda issue and we wrote a lot of stories, both print, electronic stories were there, and we saw government responding. But here is the challenge on the foreign debt. The foreign debt, we don't have the data as journalists. So now, where do journalists get that data and then start sensitizing the people? To start with, they don't understand. So for me, let us train the journalists, build capacity in journalists so that they are able to understand, appreciate, and articulate these issues in a simple language so that the ordinary person on the street will understand. Let us also not allow journalists to only write stories on the debt out of a statement issued like today, then they write a story. For me, journalists should continuously report on these issues. If they are trained, they are given that capacity. Without any statement from Minister of Finance, without any statement from IMF, the journalists will write on their own when they understand. Now, when you see silence in the media, you can't hear of a dead story on radio, on TV, in the newspaper. Just know that there is a gap somewhere, and the gap is the capacity. We need to build capacity so that journalists on their own, they can go a step ahead to get the information, package it in a simple language so that they influence public discourse, so that even members of the public will start contributing on the debate. If journalists are not saying anything, what will the public say? Like what Comrade Michael Zulu said, people are blank on this subject. It's technical. Yes, I agree with Comrade Michael. But I think let us work together, especially for the journalists. They need that much needed information on the date. Of course, in the media, there's what media bodies are pushing, what we call the Access to Information Bill. Once that bill is going to be passed in Parliament, it will be easier for a journalist to walk to the Minister of Finance to say, we want to know the exact figures on the date. We want to know which other countries are owing us so much. Of course, now we are being told it's China. Who is number 2? Who is number 3? Who is number 4? Who the country that Zambia is owing? We don't have that data. So when that law is going to be passed in Parliament, it will be easier for the journalists to go to any public body to get information, and that information is going to be disseminated to the public. But before that law is passed, we are appealing to different stakeholders with the information, especially the experts, to give the information to the journalists so that journalists can also inform the public. You know, when you are dealing with journalists, you are dealing with the masses, the millions, the thousands. They are listening through the journalists. But if we just speak on Facebook, we just speak in few other platforms, and the media is not informed, you find that we will not be making much impact. And, you know, we won't influence people. But if we go through the journalists, even the public trust the media, they trust the journalists. So we can communicate effectively, but that will be done when we build capacity in the area of date so that the journalists can report without any assignment, without waiting for a press statement from those in authority. Maybe I can end there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hatyoka. Comrade Michael, any comment based on what Mr. Hatyoka has brought forth?
Well, I think Mr. Hatyoka has just, summed it all. I think it's important that, we incapacitate journalists technically, financially. Sometimes, it's important, that these journalists are adequately equipped, because it's like, you have a policeman who does not understand police rules or policing rules, so that is unfortunately where we are with the majority of our journalists. It's very, very few journalists can articulate on the issues of debt. And like Mr. Hatyoka, has rightly said, these need to be simplified, because, citizens are, it's the dynamics of running a government where citizens put you in office is that citizens always want to be pleased. And sometimes, it's not just about just pleasing citizens. It's about explaining, to the citizens in the simplest of ways, to say, here we are, Amai and Bambo, we borrowed so much from China. It's community na Kongola Zambiri, then all these, even people, countries, that are singling out China, there are different debts, that we've acquired, and they all these creditors want profit. Believe me, they are not going to give Zambia free money. They want profit. This is a cutthroat business, so even the negotiations, the citizens do not understand, that is why, it's important. And I want to echo again the sentiments of my elder brother to say the access to information, deal has to be actualized into a law. Let us not, successive governments, say they'll give journalists, or the public access to information, but it's not, so it's going to really give some zeal to journalists, especially where investigative journalism is concerned, because at the end of the day, it's issues of corruption, issues where our leaders are stealing from the people in broad daylight, that have brought us here. And we cannot be cosmetic about these things. You know, we cannot be apologetic, you know, because it's our leaders who are stealing the people's money. That is why we have this in Congole. If our leaders were not stealing, you know, so that is why it's important that journalists, you know, are there to bridge this information gap, you know, because there is so much secrecy between the upper Mwambas, you know, and the people down there, such that, you know, these issues of debt now, you know, for some of us who are Komboni, they're seen as, you know, issues for them. You know, there is this us and them, us and them. You just hear them as headline news. You hear, you know, countries have come, you know, or rather leaders, world leaders have come into the country, and some of the discussions were to do with Zambia's debt, you know, then you wonder, you know, what is this debt doing to the citizens, you know, as we speak, you know, despite us being on the IMF package, you know, things are getting tough for the ordinary Zambians, you know. The price of meal is 200 kwacha, you know. So, you know, it's important, you know, that everybody is tagged along on this issue of debt. It should not be a thing where it's an event, you know, it's an event for glamour where when the IMF director or whoever comes from the IMF comes into the country, then, you know, that is the headline news and things like that. Then at the end of the day, you forget that the people that need to understand this thing are not you, the technocrats, are not you, the leaders. It's the simple person who is working hard and contributing to the tax base of this country. You know, the simple grandmother who is cultivating today, you know, to add to the food basket of the country. Those are the people that need to be targeted.
Thank you so much, Comrade Michael. Our dear listening viewers, you are following this conversation, which is Zambia's date. In particular, we're discussing the role of civil society organizations and the media in debt management. The conversation is brought to you by the Civil Society Debt Alliance and the Alliance for Community Action. My guests are governance activist Michael Zulu, a media expert Brian Hatyoka, Makwati, and Peter Mumba, who now has an engagement, but he will be joining us again back. He's from the Civil Society Debt Alliance. Just now we go on a short break. I would call it an informative break because we want you to follow this message. And when we come back, we continue with the program. Thank you so much. Welcome to our program. That was an informative break. We just shared a simplified information around the country's state. We hope that you followed the video. We should be having another one towards the end of the show. So stick around in order for you to get this very important information. Comrade Michael, I know you mentioned the effects or impact that debt so far has brought to the country briefly, but maybe an addition to that is, why do you think Zambians should talk about debt? And why is it important for them to know? General citizens.
For me, it's, and I think the general consensus, you know, is that people need to understand, first of all, and appreciate why they are being governed, how they are being governed, you know, because like I said earlier on, it's the people that are responsible for putting in place or in office, in authority, who governs them. So it's important, you know, that people begin to connect these things. People begin to connect. Njala ya mene muli nayo lelo. you know. If Zambia was not in such a hole, you know, a deep hole, you know, I'm not going to use Donald Trump language, but it's a deep hole in terms of debt, you know. People were going to be affording, you know, to have decent meals, you know. People were going to be affording our hospitals, first of all, would be having medicines, you know. Our people would not be drinking, you know, colored water, you know. I know they say it's not contaminated, but for crying out loud, you know, that's dirty water you can see from the color, you know. So people need to begin to understand that, you know, and I'm not saying, you know, people need to go and line up at government office to ask for money, you know, or to ask for alms. No, you need to understand that, first of all, you need to work in your own spaces. And that is why now the questions need to be asked. Don't we have Zambians who work, you know, very, very hard, you know, day in, day out, year in, year out? We have them, you know. And it's these Zambians, you know, at the end of the day, who are saying life is very difficult now, you know, prices are higher, you know. We are on this IMF package because, you know, we could not resuscitate ourselves as a country economically, you know. We kept borrowing to an extent where, you know, we became, you know, I stand to be corrected, but a junk nation in terms of debt. Because once you begin to default, you know, and you go down in the history books as a country that defaults on debt, then you know that there is a problem somewhere. And so citizens need to begin to connect all these things. You know, the capacity of the people that you put in office, you know, matters. You know, yes, you know, the people will come in all sorts of jackets, you know, all sorts of manner, all sorts of characters. You know, we had a lawyer, you know, we had another lawyer before Mwanawasa. You know, we had people who had no profession. Now we have a businessman, you know. But what have these people, you know, brought on the table that now should be able to, you know, relate to the food that is missing on your table, you know, to the hardships that you and I are facing economically or trying to do business? Because I've said, you know, we have people who are working hard, but the cost of doing business is so high, you know. Right now, you know, there are no subsidies on our fuel, you know, there are no subsidies on energy. And these are things, you know, that have made Zambians become poorer, you know. However, when you flip the coin, you know, you can see that even within this poverty that we're talking about, you know, there are people, you know, who are making money. You know, for example, in the mining industry, you know, there is a lot of concessions in the mining industry, you know, and these, you know, you know that mining companies, most of them are multinational, you know, so they come into the country, you know, get the larger share of our minerals, you know, tomorrow they are gone, you know. So we need to begin to connect all these things. Why are Zambians so poor, yet we have so much resources? You know, it all comes down to, you know, prudent management of the country's resources, accountability, you know, because we cannot talk about debt, you know. Yes, every country, let's not, I know my learned comrades will agree with me, there is no country that has no debt, you know, but it's the levels, what we are saying, it's the manner in which the money that we acquire is debt the resources that we acquire are put to use, you find that these things are in people's farms. The money is in people's farms, and there is no proof because, they say Kawola and Pakuwoko, and that is why, you find all these songs of corruption, people have stolen, 65 billion was found, and people said sorry, and, we are here because, the country has been driven in the wrong direction, probably by the wrong people for some time, so we cannot beat about the bush. So those are the hard facts, my learned listeners and viewers.
Thank you so much, Comrade Michael. Gentlemen, as we are getting closer to the conclusion of our program, I just want to put to your attention that while we are talking about probably going forward fiscal consolidation, we know that in 2022, there was, the enactment of the Public Debt Management Act number 15. Now, that means, therefore, that Zambia now creates an annual borrowing plan, which includes, for example, very quickly, information such as total borrowing needs for the next financial year, purpose of the loans to be contracted, maximum limits that the government intends to borrow in that financial year, overall net increase or decrease in public debt, debt instruments to be used, and, broad terms of the borrowings. Going forward, Comrade Michael, do you think this act now is a step in the right direction, ensuring that mismanagement of debt and or borrowing for unknown reason is controlled?
Well, for me, as long as you give so much power to a certain section of society, in our leaders, to make certain decisions that are critical, without so much oversight, then it becomes a problem. So it's important, that now, I mean, whether we like it or not, whether we say the IMF deal is bad or not, we are in it. I know that some people will remind you that the IMF deal was gotten into even before cabinet was constituted. It was announced already that we were going to go the IMF way. We've heard our Minister of Finance saying the IMF is the only way that Zambia can get out of the debt trap. But economists, like Comrade Grieve Chelwa, will argue to say, we should have approached, the debt issue in a broader perspective, on wider consultative and issues like that. But what I'm saying is that we are already where we are, so there is no need to cry over spilt milk. So we need to embrace, the programs that are being signed, as long as, they mean well for the country. Because at the end of the day, Zambians have given authorities, or the people they've put in authority, leeway, to make decisions. And up to now, there have been wrong decisions. And that is where the problem is. And that is what agitates the public, because you don't want, to be taken for a ride over and over as citizens. You grow old, then your children take over, the same position where you were, So we need, to make sure that programs that are gotten into, agreements that are signed, begin to show a benefit, especially to the ordinary citizen. The ordinary citizen need to get the benefit of being a Zambian. Zambia is so much rich in resources, but up to now, it's a section of society, that can afford, to be in an air-conditioned office, drive an air-conditioned car, have all these incentives, allowances. It's a very small section. The majority of the people out there are wallowing in poverty. And what we are saying is that for a change, dear leaders, for a change, can you lead us in the right direction and in the right manner? That is all we are asking.
All right. Thank you so much, Comrade. Comrade Hatyoka, as we conclude now, what do you pledge as media to ensure that date information about the country is shared to Zambians? Not only date information, but very accurate information is shared and in a simplified manner.
Thank you very much. Yes, as the media practitioners, I can just assure the public that the journalists are equal to the task in terms of capturing the information on date, simplifying it in the language that an ordinary person understands, and then consistently inform the public. That is, if also the stakeholders, the civil society, the economists, the ministries of finance, ministries responsible for the debt are going to work closely with the media to give them the relevant information. I can assure you the journalists are going to do more to help the country understand the issues of debt. The frustrations that journalists face on average is that getting information from an entity is not easy. Someone tell you, get back to you, put it in writing, and then we put it in writing, the information doesn't come forth. Now, how will the public get information when journalists are having these roadblocks in accessing information? Of course, I've already said we need to have the access to information bill so that it is easier not only for journalists, even for the public, including civil society, to access information. We hope that can be done so that it will be easier to get information. But by and large, journalists are professionally trained. They know that their stories must be accurate, verified, and professional. So let the experts in the areas of debt give the journalists so that they can ride on journalists to disseminate information to the public. Because if information is going to continue coming from experts direct to the public, this is where we have problems, where you are giving people information that is not being digested. So give the information first to the journalists so that the journalists can break it down and simplify it, and also try to connect it with the past. You can't just talk about a dead story now. You have to look at where we are coming from and also where we are going. I can simply say the story of the debt is a story that can be made sellable if all stakeholders are going to open up and give information to journalists. Really, issues of debt, like Comrade Michael said, they affect everyone. Just think about this at personal level. If you have a lot of Ngongoro, you have a lot of debt as an individual. It means in your house, if you are eating chicken and chips every day, you have to stop eating chicken and chips and just go for derere and a few other things that are cheaper compared to chicken and chips. That is at personal level. What more at national level? If we are going to continue accumulating huge debt, and if we have already we have this debt that is coming from the previous government, so it means if we don't manage this debt properly, people will have to tighten their belts. Unfortunately, we have to spend more now on all these essential services because money has to go back to the owner where we borrowed. So this is why everybody has to be concerned about the issues of the debt. It affects everyone. So how do we go forward as journalists? Let's journalists and the public work together, especially the experts. My concern in this interview actually are the experts who don't give information to journalists. That is my biggest concern. They want the public to know issues of debt, and yet they are not giving information to the journalists. I hope that is going to be a thing of the past going forward. And also going forward, that journalists are going to be trained so that they have more understanding on matters of debt. Really, issues of debt, whether we like it or not, they are technical. So when you just get a statement from IMF and give the public circulating on social media, just look at the comment box. Very few people are commenting, not that they don't want to comment, but because they don't understand. So I hope the road for the journalists is going to be cleaned by giving them information, by training them, so that now the journalists are going to use that information professionally, and they are going to use that information accurately without being misquoted. We know that people normally complain, say when you give information to journalists, they will misquote you. I think we need to stop thinking in that direction. Journalists are professionals who are able to handle the information professionally without any problems from the person who gave them the information.
Thank you so much, Comrade Hatyoka. Comrade Michael, as we finally conclude on this episode, what do you pledge in as far as doing your role of activism around debt management?
For me, comrade, I want to pledge to the Zambian people that I will be a voice in terms of matters of governance, matters of public interest, and debt being a matter of public interest, will be, a constant feature on my social platforms, in my music, in what we do, and just in the way, that we interact with the people. So that is our humble pledge, and this pledge, we, we do it with, you know, uh, sometimes with support, sometimes without support, but we still do it. And that is, the passion that we have, because I want to believe that once Zambia, the ship called Zambia, is steered in the right direction, I think everybody, should be happy. I know it's not easy to make everybody happy all the time at once, but I think the situation where we find ourselves in as Zambians, is a deplorable situation, and we need to accept the fact that we are in a bad situation as a country, and we need to get ourselves out of this. So for us, we are going to be the voices of credible information. We will work with the media, we'll work with the different stakeholders to make sure that information on debt and public accountability, is accessed by the general citizenry.
Thank you so much, comrades. Please take care. It's a long weekend ahead of us. Take good care of yourselves wherever you are. And this finally concludes today's episode. We've been discussing Zambia's debt in particular. We were looking at the role of civil society organizations and the media in debt management. My guests were Comrade Michael Zulu, who is a governance activist, and also Brian Hatyoka Makwati. He is a media expert. In absentia, I also had a representative from Civil Society Debt Alliance by the name of Peter Mumba. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure once again. Please take care. It's a long weekend ahead of us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And finally, like I always say,
Thank you
whether you
very much.
support...
Enjoy the long weekend too.
Thank you, sir. So I was saying, whether you support Chelsea, you support Arsenal, you support Manchester City, and the mighty Manchester United, as long as you're in Zambia, you are all affected by the debt situation. It's very important that you need to learn, you need to understand, you need to talk about debt. And for more details on how you can learn anything, any information around debt, please feel free to follow the Civil Society Debt Alliance Facebook page. Follow and like. You will not regret in as far as debt information is concerned. And also, much thanks goes to Chanda, who has been our technician of the day. It would have been not fair if I didn't recognize you, sir. Thank you so much for being so helpful. So this concludes our episode. We will leave you with a message, a simplified message around that situation. The program, once again, was brought to you by the Civil Society Debt Alliance as well as the Alliance for Community Action. Thank you so much, and take care.